The last thing I expected to hear when I walked into our apartment that Tuesday evening was laughter. Not just any laughter, the cruel, mocking kind that cuts through your chest like broken glass. But there it was, echoing from our bedroom, followed by a voice I'd loved for 3 years, saying words that would change everything. "You'll die alone." Marcus laughed, his voice dripping with vicious amusement. "Nobody else will ever want damaged goods like her?" I froze in the hallway, my hand still on the door handle, grocery bags cutting into my palms. The milk I'd bought for his morning coffee suddenly felt impossibly heavy. My heart hammered against my ribs as I strained to hear more, hoping desperately that I'd misunderstood, that he was talking about someone else. Anyone else. "I mean, seriously," he continued, and I could hear the bed springs creaking. My stomach lurched. "She's so clingy and insecure. Always asking where I am, always wanting to know who I'm with. It's pathetic. And don't even get me started on how she looks without makeup." A woman's voice responded, soft and sultry. "Poor thing. She has no idea, does she?" "None whatsoever," Marcus replied, and I could practically hear his smug grin. "She actually thinks we're going to get married. Can you imagine? Me settling down with that mess? I'm just keeping her around until something better comes along." Which thankfully it has. The woman giggled. "You're terrible. Maybe. But you love it." I stood there in the hallway of what I'd thought was our home, groceries scattered around my feet where I'd dropped them, trying to process what I'd just heard. 3 years. 3 years of my life I'd given to this man. 3 years of cooking his favorite meals, doing his laundry, supporting him through his job search, believing his promises about our future together. The apartment we'd decorated together suddenly felt foreign, hostile. The framed photos of us on the walls seemed to mock me. All those smiles, all those moments I'd thought were genuine. How long had this been going on? How long had he been laughing at me behind my back? My legs felt weak, but something deep inside me hardened. I'd always been the type to internalize pain, to blame myself first. But this was different. The humiliation burned through me like acid, but underneath it, something cold and calculating began to take shape. I backed away from the door quietly, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. In the kitchen, I gripped the marble countertop until my knuckles went white, staring at my reflection in the chrome surface of the refrigerator. My face looked pale, hollow. Is this what he saw when he looked at me? Damaged goods? The voices from the bedroom grew louder, more animated. They weren't even trying to be quiet anymore. Why would they? Marcus thought I was at my book club, just like I was every Tuesday. Just like I had been every Tuesday for the past 6 months, because he'd encouraged me to get out more and make friends. How thoughtful of him to give me a hobby so he could have the apartment to himself. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called my book club leader, Sarah. "Hey, I'm feeling sick tonight. Can you tell everyone I won't make it?" "Of course, honey." "Feel better," she said warmly. If only she knew how sick I really felt. I gathered up the groceries mechanically, put away the milk he'd never drink, the steaks I'd planned to cook for our 3-year anniversary dinner this weekend. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been planning to celebrate our relationship while he'd been planning its end, but I wasn't going to confront him. Not yet. Something told me to wait, to watch, to gather information. Maybe it was self-preservation, or maybe it was the beginnings of something darker. Either way, I found myself creeping back toward the bedroom door. "So when are you going to dump her?" the woman asked. "Soon," Marcus replied. "I'm just waiting for the right moment. She's been hinting about moving in together permanently, getting engaged. It's getting embarrassing. We already live together, had for 8 months. What did he mean by permanently? What's stopping you from just telling her now?" Marcus sighed dramatically. "She's so emotionally fragile. I'm worried she might do something drastic. Plus, she's been helping with my rent while I'm between jobs. Might as well milk that a little longer." My breath caught in my throat. Between jobs? He'd told me he was working as a freelance consultant. I'd been paying for everything, rent, groceries, utilities, because he said his payments were irregular. I dipped into my savings, the money I'd been carefully setting aside for our future, to support what I thought was our life together. "You're using her," the woman said, but she sounded amused rather than disgusted. "She's using me too," Marcus replied. "For companionship, for the illusion that someone could love her. It's mutually beneficial, for now." The casual cruelty in his voice made my vision blur with tears. This was the man who'd held me when I cried about my father's death. The man who'd told me I was beautiful every morning. The man who'd promised me we'd grow old together. Besides, he continued, where is she going to go? Back to her sad little life? She doesn't have any real friends besides me. Her family barely tolerates her. She's completely dependent on me emotionally. Even if she found out about us, she'd probably just beg me to stay. The woman laughed. God, that's depressing. It is what it is. Some people are just meant to be alone. She's one of them. I'm just postponing the inevitable. Those words hit me like a physical blow. You'll die alone. That's what he'd said at the beginning, and now I understood the context. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was systematically destroying my sense of self-worth while doing it. I backed away from the door again, my entire body trembling with a mixture of grief and rage. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed, my face blotchy from crying. Is this really what I looked like? Pathetic and desperate? I refused to accept that version of myself. I splashed cold water on my face and took several deep breaths. Think, I told myself. Don't just react. Think. Marcus had made several crucial mistakes in his assessment of me. First, he'd underestimated my financial independence. While I'd been supporting him, I still had my job at the marketing firm, a job I was actually quite good at. I'd been promoted twice in the past year, and my salary was substantial enough that I'd only dipped into my savings to help him because I'd wanted to, not because I'd needed to. Second, he'd assumed I was socially isolated. While it was true that I didn't have a large circle of friends, the ones I did have were quality relationships. Sarah from book club, my colleague Jennifer, my college roommate Lisa, who lived across the country but called every week. These weren't superficial connections. They were real friendships built on mutual respect and genuine care. Third, and most importantly, he'd assumed I would crumble under the weight of his betrayal, that I would beg, plead, and accept whatever scraps of affection he was willing to throw my way. He was wrong on all counts. I walked back to the kitchen and opened my laptop. If Marcus thought I was pathetic and unmarriageable, I was going to prove him spectacularly wrong. But I wasn't going to do it by confronting him directly. That would give him too much power, too much opportunity to manipulate the situation and make me look like the crazy ex-girlfriend. No, I was going to do something much more effective. I was going to disappear from his life completely and rebuild myself into everything he'd convinced me I could never be. But first, I needed to document everything. I opened a new folder on my laptop and titled it Evidence. Then I began systematically going through our shared accounts, our communications, our financial arrangements. I took screenshots of the Venmo payments I'd made to him, the rent checks I'd written for our apartment that was actually only in his name, the credit card statements showing how I'd been funding our lifestyle while he contributed nothing. Every piece of evidence painted the same picture. I'd been supporting a man who viewed me as a convenient bank account with benefits. The voices from the bedroom had quieted, and I heard the shower start running. My window of opportunity was closing, but I'd gathered enough information for now. The woman, whoever she was, would probably be leaving soon, and Marcus would emerge expecting me to cook dinner and ask about his day with that same devoted smile I'd worn for 3 years. Instead, I was going to give him exactly what he expected, the performance of a girlfriend who suspected nothing. 20 minutes later, I heard the front door close and footsteps approaching the kitchen. I was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of his favorite pasta sauce, having changed into the dress he'd complimented me on last week. "Hey, baby," Marcus said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. His voice was warm, affectionate. If I hadn't heard him laughing about my appearance an hour ago, I might have melted into his embrace. "How was book club?" "Oh, I didn't go," I said lightly, not turning around. "I wasn't feeling well, so I came home early. I've been here cooking for about an hour." I felt him tense slightly behind me. "Really? I didn't hear you come in." "I was trying to be quiet in case you were napping," I replied smoothly. "You seemed tired this morning." "Yeah, I was," he said, relaxing again. "Actually took a little nap this afternoon." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily. How many others had there been? "Well, you seem refreshed now," I said, finally turning in his arms to look at him. His hair was still slightly damp from the shower. "Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes. He kissed my forehead, the same gentle gesture that had once made my heart flutter. Now it made my skin crawl. "You're the best, you know that?" "I try," I said, managing a smile. As we ate dinner, I played my part perfectly. I asked about his day, laughed at his jokes, listened attentively as he complained about his latest consulting project. All the while, I was mentally cataloging every lie, every manipulation, every casual cruelty disguised as affection. When he suggested we watch a movie after dinner, I curled up next to him on the couch, just like always. When he pulled me closer and whispered that he loved me, I whispered it back. When he fell asleep with his head on my shoulder halfway through the film, I stayed perfectly still so I wouldn't wake him. But inside I was planning. The next morning, Marcus left for what he claimed was a client meeting. The moment his car disappeared around the corner, I was on my phone. "Jennifer?" I said when my colleague answered. "I need a favor, and it's going to sound strange." Jennifer and I had worked together for 2 years, and she was one of the few people who knew about my relationship struggles, though I'd always downplayed them. She was sharp, successful, and had a network of contacts that spanned the city's business community. "What's going on?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "I need to completely reinvent my life," I said, "and I need to do it fast." There was a pause. "Okay, that's not what I expected to hear at 8 in the morning, but I'm listening." I told her everything, not the emotional details. I wasn't ready for that level of vulnerability yet, but the facts. The cheating, the financial manipulation, the casual cruelty. By the time I finished, Jennifer was silent for a long moment. "That bastard," she finally said. "I never liked him, you know. Too smooth, too charming. Men like that are usually compensating for something." "I need to get out," I said, "but I don't want to just disappear. I want to show him exactly how wrong he was about me." "What did you have in mind?" "I want to become everything he said I could never be. Successful, independent, desirable. I want to prove that his assessment of me was complete bullshit." Jennifer laughed, but it wasn't mocking. It was delighted. "Oh, honey, you have no idea how doable this is. You're already successful and independent. You just need to recognize it and package it better." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've been hiding your light under a bushel for years, trying to make that loser feel important. Do you have any idea how impressive your work has been lately? The Morrison campaign you led last month increased their revenue by 30%. The rebranding strategy you developed for Chen Industries is being used as a case study in business schools. I'd known my work was good, but I'd never really thought about it in those terms." Marcus had always minimized my achievements, suggesting that marketing was just playing with pretty pictures, and that my success was mostly luck. "I've been thinking about this for a while, actually," Jennifer continued. "There's a position opening up at Peterson & Associates. They're one of the top marketing firms in the city. The salary is almost double what you're making now, plus equity and a signing bonus. I know the managing partner personally. Want me to make a call?" My heart raced. Peterson & Associates? I'd dreamed of working there, but had never thought I was qualified enough to apply. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious." "But that's just the beginning. If we're going to reinvent you, we're doing it right. New job, new apartment, new wardrobe, new social circle, the works." For the first time since I'd overheard Marcus's conversation, I felt something other than pain and anger. I felt hope. "There's something else," I said hesitantly. "This is going to sound crazy, but I want him to see what he lost. I want him to understand that he made the biggest mistake of his life. Revenge is a dish best served cold," Jennifer said thoughtfully. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know yet, but something that will make it clear that his assessment of me was completely wrong." "Leave that to me," Jennifer said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I have some ideas. But first, let's focus on getting you out of there and into your new life. How soon can you move?" I looked around the apartment that had felt like home until yesterday. Now it felt like a prison. Every piece of furniture a reminder of the lies I'd been living. "How soon can you make that call?" "I'll call David Peterson right now. Can you come in for an interview this afternoon?" "I'll make it work." After I hung up with Jennifer, I sat in the silence of the apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about my future. For 3 years, I'd been planning my life around Marcus, around us, around a future that had never been real. Now, for the first time, I was planning for myself, but I wasn't ready to tip my hand yet. I still had some reconnaissance to do. I spent the morning going through Marcus's things while he was out. I felt a twinge of guilt about invading his privacy, but it evaporated quickly when I reminded myself that he'd been lying to me for months, possibly years. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. In his email, I discovered conversations with not just one woman, but 3, all of them dating back months. All of them containing the same dismissive comments about me, the same casual cruelty, the same assurances that I was just a temporary convenience. One email chain was particularly devastating. It was with someone named Ashley, and it went back almost 6 months. "She's been asking about engagement rings lately." Marcus had written, "It's getting uncomfortable. I keep deflecting, but she's persistent. Ashley's response, just string her along a little longer. Didn't you say she was helping with your rent? Yeah, and other stuff too. She's basically funding my lifestyle while I figure out what I really want to do. It's actually pretty convenient. You're terrible, but I respect the hustle. Just don't let her get too attached. Too late for that? Marcus had replied. But she's so desperate for love that she'll accept whatever scraps I throw her way. It's actually kind of sad. I had to close the laptop and walk away. The casual way they discussed my emotions, my financial contributions, my hopes for our future, it was like reading about a stranger. A pathetic stranger they both pitied and used. But the worst part was how accurately they'd assessed my behavior. I had been desperate for his love. I had accepted scraps. I had been so grateful for any affection that I'd ignored obvious red flags. Not anymore. I opened the laptop again and continued reading. What I discovered next changed everything. In his text messages with Ashley, I found something that made my blood run cold. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning to move in together. In fact, they'd already signed a lease for a new apartment. The move-in date was next month, which meant Marcus was planning to dump me in the next few weeks, leaving me with nowhere to live and no warning to find alternative housing. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what I found next, a detailed discussion about how to handle me when the time came. She's going to be devastated, Ashley had texted. Are you worried about her doing something dramatic? Nah, Marcus had replied. She's all bark and no bite. She'll cry for a few days, maybe call me begging for another chance, but she doesn't have the backbone to cause real trouble. I'll just block her number and move on. What if she tries to contact you at work? She doesn't even know where I work. I've been telling her I'm freelancing, remember? By the time she figures out I've been lying about that too, I'll be long gone. You've really thought this through. I had to. She's more pathetic than I initially realized. The level of self-delusion is actually impressive. She really thinks we're going to get married and have kids and all that suburban bullshit. Reading those words, something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped. Like a rubber band stretched too far, releasing all its stored energy at once. They thought I was pathetic? They thought I lacked backbone? They thought I would just cry for a few days and then fade quietly into the background of their lives? They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. I closed the laptop and walked to the bathroom, looking at myself in the mirror again. But this time, I didn't see someone weak and desperate. I saw someone who had been systematically undermined and manipulated by a sociopath and his equally callous girlfriend. I saw someone who was about to remind them that still waters run very, very deep. My phone rang. It was Jennifer. Great news, she said without preamble. David wants to meet with you at 3 o'clock today. Can you make it? I'll be there. And Sarah? I told him a little about your situation, not the details, just that you were looking for a fresh start. He's had his own experiences with toxic relationships. He's rooting for you. After I hung up, I spent an hour getting ready for the interview. But it wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about stepping into the person I was going to become. I chose my best suit, the navy blue one I'd bought for a presentation last year, but had only worn once because Marcus had said it made me look too serious. I styled my hair in a sleek updo instead of the loose waves he preferred. I applied makeup with precision, creating a look that was professional and polished rather than the soft, natural style he'd always complimented. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. And that was exactly the point. The interview went better than I could have dreamed. David Peterson was in his 50s, distinguished and sharp, with kind eyes that didn't miss anything. He asked tough questions about my experience, my goals, my vision for the industry, but he also asked gentler questions about what I was looking for in a new position, what kind of environment would help me thrive. Jennifer tells me you're at a transition point in your life, he said toward the end of our conversation. You could say that, I replied carefully. Good, he said firmly. The best work comes from people who are ready to push themselves beyond what they thought was possible. Comfort zones are creativity killers. When he offered me the position on the spot, with a salary that was indeed nearly double what I was currently making, I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from crying. There is one thing, he said as we shook hands. The position comes with some travel and occasionally some networking events. High-end clients, charity galas, that sort of thing. I hope that won't be a problem. Not at all, I said, though my mind was already racing. Networking events meant meeting new people, expanding my social circle, building connections. Everything Marcus had convinced me I was incapable of doing. Excellent. Oh, and Sarah? I know this might sound presumptuous, but if you need any help with the transition, finding a new place to live, getting settled, let me know. I've been where you are. Sometimes we all need a little support to make a big change. Walking out of that building, I felt like a different person than the one who had walked in. I had a new job, a new salary, and new possibilities stretching out before me like an open road. But I still had some unfinished business to take care of. Instead of going home, I drove to the nicest part of the city, where the high-end apartments and condos offered luxury living for successful professionals. If I was going to reinvent myself, I was going to do it right. The leasing agent at Meridian Towers was a polished woman named Catherine, who immediately understood what I was looking for: something elegant, modern, and completely unlike the bohemian style Marcus had preferred. "This unit just became available," she said, leading me into a corner apartment on the 15th floor. 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, city views, full amenities. It's one of our premium units. The apartment was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, gleaming hardwood floors, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The rent was steep, but with my new salary, it was manageable. "I'll take it," I said. Catherine looked surprised. "Don't you want to think about it? Discuss it with your partner?" "No partner," I said firmly. "Just me. And I don't need to think about it. This is exactly what I want." As I signed the lease, Catherine mentioned something that made me pause. "You know, this building has become quite popular with the business community," she said. "We have several marketing executives, some finance people, a few entrepreneurs. There's actually a really nice social scene here if you're interested in meeting people." Meeting people, building connections, expanding my world. "That sounds perfect," I said. Driving home, I felt like I was living in a movie. In the span of one day, I'd gotten a dream job and found a beautiful new home. I was building the foundation for a completely new life. But Marcus didn't know any of this yet. As far as he was concerned, I was still the same insecure woman who had cooked his dinner last night and told him I loved him. I planned to keep it that way for a little while longer. When I got home, Marcus was on the couch watching TV. He looked up when I walked in, and I saw his eyes take in my appearance. The suit, the professional styling, the confidence in my posture. "Wow, you look great," he said, seeming genuinely surprised. "What's the occasion?" "I had a meeting," I said casually. "Work stuff." It wasn't technically a lie. "Everything okay?" he asked, and I caught something in his tone that I'd never heard before. Uncertainty, maybe even a hint of concern. "Everything's fine," I said, giving him the same warm smile I'd been giving him for 3 years. "Actually, everything's great." That night, as Marcus slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and finalizing my plans. I had 2 weeks before I started my new job, which meant 2 weeks to prepare for my exit from this life and my entrance into the next one. But I wasn't just going to disappear quietly. Marcus had underestimated me in every possible way, and I was going to make sure he understood the magnitude of his mistake. He thought I would die alone? He thought no one else would ever want me? I was going to prove him wrong in the most spectacular way possible. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a master of compartmentalization. During the day, I was transforming into someone I barely recognized, someone confident, polished, and completely in control of her destiny. During the evening, I was still Marcus's devoted girlfriend, cooking his meals and listening to his lies with a smile that never faltered. The dichotomy was almost surreal. I'd spend my morning at the spa getting a complete makeover, new haircut, professional styling, even a consultation with a personal shopper who helped me build a wardrobe that screamed success. Then I'd come home and slip back into the role of the woman Marcus thought he knew, the woman he was planning to discard like yesterday's newspaper. My transformation wasn't just physical, though that was the most visible part. Jennifer had been right. I'd been hiding myself for years, dimming my own light to make Marcus feel more important. Now, without his constant undermining, I was remembering who I actually was. I was smart, capable, and far more resilient than either of us had given me credit for. The networking events David had mentioned started immediately. The first was a charity gala for the Children's Hospital, and I almost didn't go. The old me would have made excuses, claimed I didn't have anything appropriate to wear, worried about not knowing anyone. But the new me, the real me, bought a stunning black cocktail dress and showed up with my head held high. That's where I met him. Richard Blackwood was everything Marcus wasn't. Where Marcus was charming in a calculated way, Richard was genuinely warm. Where Marcus was unemployed and content to let me support him, Richard had built a software company from the ground up and sold it for 8 figures before his 40th birthday. Where Marcus made me feel small and insecure, Richard made me feel interesting and valued. He approached me at the bar, where I was nursing a glass of wine and trying to work up the courage to mingle. "You look like you're planning something devious," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. I laughed, surprised by how accurate his assessment was. "What makes you say that?" "There's a certain look people get when they're plotting world domination," he said. "I should know. I've worn it myself a few times." We talked for 3 hours. About business, about books, about travel, about dreams we'd set aside and goals we were still chasing. He was funny without being cruel, confident without being arrogant, successful without being flashy. When he asked for my number at the end of the evening, I gave it to him without hesitation. Walking to my car afterward, I felt like I was floating. This was what it felt like to connect with someone who saw me as an equal, who was genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions. This was what I'd been missing for 3 years without even realizing it. Richard called the next day. Then the day after that, we had dinner at a restaurant that probably cost more than Marcus spent on food in a month. We went to art galleries and theater performances, places Marcus had always dismissed as boring or pretentious. With Richard, I remembered how much I enjoyed cultural experiences, how much I'd missed having someone to share them with. But the best part wasn't the expensive dinners or the glamorous events. It was the way Richard listened to me. Really listened, asked follow-up questions, remembered details from previous conversations. When I mentioned loving mystery novels, he showed up to our next date with a signed first edition from my favorite author. When I told him about my new job, he was genuinely excited for me, asking about my goals and offering insights from his own experience building a business. "You know what I like about you?" he said one evening as we walked along the waterfront after dinner. "What's that?" "You're ambitious but not ruthless, driven but not desperate. You know what you want, but you're not willing to step on people to get it." If only he knew what I was planning for Marcus. 3 weeks into dating Richard, he brought up something that made my heart skip a beat. "I've been thinking about buying a house," he said as we sat in his penthouse apartment, looking out at the city lights. "Something with character, you know? Maybe in Riverside Heights?" Riverside Heights, the upscale neighborhood where Marcus and Ashley had signed their lease. "That's a beautiful area," I said carefully. "Yeah, I looked at a place there last week. Victorian mansion, completely renovated. It's right across from this charming little apartment complex. Very quaint." My pulse quickened. Could it be the same complex where Marcus and Ashley were planning to play house? "Which complex?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Riverside Gardens, I think. Pretty little courtyard, very intimate. The realtor mentioned that a lot of young professionals live there." "Bingo. The house sounds amazing," I said. "I'd love to see it sometime." "Actually," Richard said, taking my hand, "I was hoping you'd help me decide. I trust your taste." 2 days later, we were walking through the most beautiful house I'd ever seen. It was a restored Victorian with original hardwood floors, crown molding, and a kitchen that belonged in Architectural Digest. But the best part was standing in the master bedroom, looking out the window at the perfect view of Riverside Gardens across the street. "What do you think?" Richard asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I leaned back against his chest, watching a couple emerge from one of the ground floor apartments. They were young, attractive, and completely unaware that they were being observed. It wasn't Marcus and Ashley. They wouldn't move in for another few weeks, but it could have been them. "I think it's perfect," I said. Richard bought the house that afternoon. Meanwhile, back in my double life, Marcus was becoming increasingly suspicious. Not of the affair I was having. He was too arrogant to consider that possibility, but of the changes he was seeing in me. "You seem different lately," he said one evening as I cooked dinner. "More, I don't know, confident? Do I?" I asked innocently. "Must be all those self-help books I've been reading." It wasn't entirely a lie. I had been reading, voraciously, everything I could get my hands on about narcissistic personality disorder, emotional manipulation, and trauma recovery. The more I learned, the more clearly I could see the patterns in our relationship, the systematic way he'd undermined my self-worth. "Yeah, well, don't get too confident," he said with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You know what they say about pride going before a fall." The casual threat in his voice confirmed what I already knew. Marcus needed me to stay small, insecure, dependent. My growing confidence threatened the entire dynamic he'd carefully constructed. "Of course," I said sweetly. "I wouldn't want to get above myself." but I was already so far above myself that I could barely see where I'd started. A week before Marcus and Ashley's move-in date, I put my own plan into motion. I'd been tracking their preparations through Marcus's phone, which he'd carelessly left unlocked on several occasions. They'd ordered furniture, scheduled utility connections, even planned a housewarming party. Everything was falling into place for their new life together. They had no idea I knew about any of it. On a Tuesday evening, exactly 1 month after I'd overheard that first devastating conversation, I cooked Marcus's favorite meal one last time. Beef Wellington, roasted vegetables, his favorite wine. I even lit candles and put on the dress he'd bought me for my birthday. "What's the occasion?" he asked, clearly pleased but puzzled by the effort. "Do I need an occasion to spoil my boyfriend?" I asked, refilling his wine glass. As we ate, I studied his face, memorizing every detail. The way his eyes lit up when he talked about his consulting projects, the satisfied smile he wore when I laughed at his jokes, the casual affection in his voice when he called me baby. All of it was performance, I realized now. Every single moment of tenderness had been calculated to keep me compliant and generous. After dinner, I suggested we watch a movie. Something romantic, I said. Something that would remind us why we were together. Marcus was in such a good mood, probably thinking about how smoothly his deception was going, that he agreed immediately. Halfway through the film, I excused myself to use the bathroom. Instead, I went to the bedroom and quietly packed a single suitcase with essentials. Everything else, the furniture we'd bought together, the decorations I'd chosen, the life I'd built in this space, I was leaving behind. Let him figure out what to do with it. In the morning, after Marcus left for his consulting meeting, which I now knew was actually a gym session with Ashley, I would disappear from his life as completely as if I'd never existed. But first, I had one more performance to give. I returned to the living room and curled up next to Marcus on the couch. When he put his arm around me, I didn't flinch. When he whispered that he loved me, I whispered it back. When he suggested we go to bed early, I smiled and led him to the bedroom. That night, as Marcus slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake and said goodbye to the woman I'd been for the past 3 years. Tomorrow, she would cease to exist. In her place would be someone stronger, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous to people who underestimated her. At 6 a.m., I heard Marcus's alarm go off. He rolled over and kissed my forehead, just like he had every morning for 3 years. "See you tonight, baby," he murmured. "See you tonight," I replied. It was the last lie I would ever tell him. An hour after he left, I was gone. I took my suitcase, my laptop, and my car. Everything else, every piece of our shared life, I left exactly as it was. The coffee mug he'd used that morning was still in the sink. The note I'd written reminding him to pick up dry cleaning was still on the counter. The impression that I'd just stepped out for a moment was perfect, except I was never coming back. I drove straight to my new apartment at Meridian Towers and spent the day getting settled. The movers I'd secretly hired brought the furniture I'd selected, modern, elegant pieces that Marcus would have hated. By evening, my new space looked like a magazine spread. Clean lines, neutral colors, and not a single reminder of the life I'd left behind. My phone rang constantly throughout the day. Marcus calling, texting, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. I listened to them all, but I didn't respond. The first few were confused. "Hey, where are you? Your book club friends said you weren't there." Then concerned. "Sarah, I'm starting to worry. Can you call me back?" Then angry. "This isn't funny anymore. Where the hell are you?" By evening, they'd turned desperate. "Please, just tell me you're okay. We can work through whatever's wrong." I saved every message. Evidence of his panic, his realization that his carefully constructed life was crumbling. Meanwhile, Richard was helping me christen my new apartment with Chinese takeout and champagne. He'd been nothing but supportive of my sudden need for independence, accepting my explanation that I'd been staying with a friend while looking for my own place. He didn't push for details about my previous living situation, and I was grateful for his discretion. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his champagne glass. "To new beginnings," I echoed. 3 days later, I started my new job at Peterson & Associates. The work was challenging, engaging, and exactly what I'd been craving without realizing it. My colleagues were intelligent, ambitious people who treated me as an equal from day one. David Peterson assigned me to high-profile accounts, trusting me with responsibilities that Marcus had convinced me I wasn't capable of handling. Within a week, I was thriving. The long hours and complex projects energized me rather than draining me. For the first time in years, I was using my full intellectual capacity, and the results were immediate and impressive. You're a natural at this," Jennifer said as we reviewed my first campaign proposal. "I don't know what that ex of yours was telling you, but he was completely wrong about your capabilities. He'd been wrong about everything. While I was building my new life, Marcus was apparently losing his mind. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard fragments of his story. He'd filed a missing person report, which was quickly dismissed when it became clear that I'd left voluntarily. He'd contacted my job, my family, anyone he could think of who might know where I was. But I'd been careful. I'd told my family I was taking some time to focus on myself after a difficult breakup. I'd informed my former employer that I was pursuing new opportunities. Everyone who mattered knew I was safe and making positive changes in my life. They just didn't know the details. 2 weeks after my disappearance, Marcus showed up at my former workplace, demanding to speak with me. Security had to escort him out when he became belligerent, insisting that something terrible must have happened to me because I would never leave him voluntarily. The irony was delicious. The man who'd been planning to abandon me without warning couldn't fathom that I might abandon him first. But the best was yet to come. Richard's closing on the Victorian house went smoothly, and he asked me to move in with him just 6 weeks after we'd met. Under normal circumstances, it might have seemed fast, but nothing about my circumstances was normal. Besides, I was falling for him hard, and the practical advantages of the situation were undeniable. "Are you sure?" I asked when he brought it up. "We haven't been together very long." "I know," he said, pulling me close. "But I've never felt this way about anyone before. You're brilliant, beautiful, ambitious, everything I've been looking for. I don't want to waste time playing games or following arbitrary timelines. Besides," he added with a grin, "you'll love the neighborhood. Very entertaining people-watching opportunities. If only he knew." Moving into Richard's house was like stepping into a fairy tale. The renovations were complete and every room was perfect. The master suite had a sitting area by the window that looked directly across at Riverside Gardens. I spent hours there, ostensibly reading or working on my laptop, but actually watching and waiting. Marcus and Ashley moved in on a Saturday. I watched from my window as they carried boxes and furniture into their ground floor apartment, laughing and kissing like newlyweds. Marcus looked different. Lighter, happier than I'd seen him in months. This was the man he became when he wasn't performing the role of my devoted boyfriend. Ashley was everything I'd expected her to be. Blonde, petite, with the kind of effortless style that comes from having money and time to spend on yourself. She was beautiful in a conventional way, the type of woman who would photograph well on Marcus's social media. They had no idea they were being observed. That evening, Richard and I had a dinner party for some of his business associates. 20 people, catered by one of the city's best restaurants, served in our elegant dining room. Through the windows, our guests could see the charming apartment complex across the street, with its twinkling lights and intimate courtyard. "Beautiful view," one guest commented. "Yes," I agreed. "Very picturesque." As the weeks passed, I settled into a routine that felt like the life I'd always been meant to live. My career was flourishing. I'd already been promoted once and was being considered for a partnership track. My relationship with Richard was deepening into something real and substantial. My social circle was expanding to include interesting, accomplished people who valued my opinions and enjoyed my company. I was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way I hadn't been in years. But I was also patient. I was waiting for the perfect moment to reveal myself to Marcus and Ashley, to let them know that their assessment of me had been catastrophically wrong. That moment came sooner than I'd expected. 2 months after they'd moved in, Marcus lost his temper in the courtyard of their apartment complex. I was sitting by my window, working on a presentation for a major client, when I heard shouting. Looking down, I saw Marcus pacing back and forth while Ashley sat on a bench, her face in her hands. "This is all your fault," he was yelling. "If you hadn't pushed me to dump her so fast, I'd still have access to her money." My blood ran cold. Even now, even after everything, he was thinking about my financial contributions. "You said she was pathetic," Ashley shot back. "You said she'd never leave." She was pathetic. That's what made this so fucking infuriating. She was supposed to be desperate for my attention, not disappear without a trace. I opened my window slightly so I could hear better. "Maybe she's dead," Ashley said hopefully. "Maybe something happened to her and that's why—" "She's not dead," Marcus interrupted. "I hired a private investigator. She's alive and well and apparently thriving. New job, new apartment, completely cut off all contact with everyone we knew in common. So what do we do now?" Now we figure out how to survive without her subsidizing our lifestyle, Marcus said bitterly. Do you have any idea how expensive this place is when you're actually paying for it yourself? I had to cover my mouth to keep from laughing out loud. They were already struggling financially, just 2 months into their dream life together. I thought you said you had consulting income, Ashley said. I lied, Marcus snapped. I've been living off her for 2 years. I don't have any consulting clients. I don't have any income at all. The truth, finally. Even with each other, they'd been lying. What are we going to do? Ashley asked, and now she sounded panicked. I don't know, Marcus admitted. Maybe I can get her back. Maybe if I apologize, explain that I was confused, that I made a mistake. Are you serious right now? Ashley's voice was shrill. You want to go crawling back to her? She was supporting both of us whether she knew it or not. Marcus said, I need that financial stability. And what about me? What about you? You don't contribute anything either. Their fairy tale romance was crumbling right before my eyes, and they had no idea they had an audience. As their argument escalated, I made a decision. It was time. I walked downstairs and out onto my front porch, making just enough noise to draw their attention. When Marcus looked up and saw me standing there, his face went white. Hello, Marcus, I said calmly. He stared at me for a long moment, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Finally, he managed to stammer, Sarah? What ... How are you here? I live here, I said simply, gesturing to the magnificent house behind me. Ashley looked between us, confusion evident on her face. Who is that? That, Marcus said in a strangled voice, is Sarah. Your ex? Ashley's eyes widened as she took in my appearance, the designer dress, the professional styling, the confidence in my posture. But you said she was pathetic? I suggested helpfully. A loser who would die alone? Marcus flinched as if I'd slapped him. Damaged goods that no one else would ever want? I continued, my voice never losing its pleasant tone. Sarah, please, Marcus started, but I held up a hand to stop him. Oh, I'm not done yet, I said. You also said I was emotionally fragile, completely dependent on you, and too desperate for love to ever leave you. Did I get that right? Ashley was staring at me like I was a ghost, which, in a way, I suppose I was. The ghost of the woman Marcus thought he'd destroyed. How do you know what we said? She whispered. I heard you, I said simply. That night in our apartment when you thought I was at book club. I came home early and heard every word. Marcus sank onto the bench beside Ashley, his face ashen. You heard us? Every single word, I confirmed. Your assessment of my character, your plans to dump me, your discussion of how to handle me when the time came. Sarah, I can explain. No need, I said. You were actually quite thorough. You painted a very clear picture of what you thought of me. Just then, Richard appeared on the porch beside me. Everything okay out here? He asked, putting a protective arm around my waist. Marcus stared at Richard. Tall, handsome, obviously successful based on his expensive clothes and confident demeanor. Marcus, Ashley, I said, I'd like you to meet my fiancé, Richard Blackwood. It was a lie. Richard and I weren't engaged yet, though I suspected it was heading in that direction. But the effect was immediate and devastating. Marcus's face crumpled. Fiancé? We met at a charity gala, I said conversationally. Richard owns the software company Blackwood Industries. Perhaps you've heard of it? Even Ashley looked impressed despite herself. Blackwood Industries was famous in the city, known for both its innovative products and its philanthropic efforts. We're having the wedding next spring, I continued. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. Richard suggested we start our married life in this beautiful house he bought. Right across from your charming little apartment, Richard added, catching on to the dynamic even though he didn't know the full story. Such a lovely view. Marcus stood up shakily. Sarah, can we talk? Privately? I don't think so, I said. We don't really have anything to discuss. Please, he said, and for the first time in our entire relationship, he sounded truly desperate. I made a mistake. I was confused. I was scared of commitment. You were lying to me about having a job while you spent my money on dates with another woman. I interrupted. That's not confusion, Marcus. That's calculation. Ashley stood up too, her face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You're just trying to make him jealous with some rich boyfriend. Fiancé? I corrected. And no, I'm not trying to make anyone jealous. I'm simply living my life. This is all fake, Ashley continued, her voice getting shriller. You probably hired some actor, Richard laughed, a sound that was both amused and slightly menacing. I can assure you I'm quite real, and quite smitten with my beautiful fiancé. He kissed my temple and I saw Marcus flinch. "You know what the funny thing is?" I said to Marcus. "You were right about one thing. I was pathetic. I was so desperate for love that I accepted scraps from someone who didn't deserve me. But you were wrong about everything else. I'm not damaged goods. I'm not unmarriageable. I'm not going to die alone. In fact," I continued, "I've never been happier in my life." Marcus was staring at me like he'd never seen me before, which, in a way, he hadn't. The woman standing on this porch, confident and radiant and deeply in love, was someone he'd never met. "I loved you," he said quietly. "No," I said firmly. "You loved what I could do for you. You loved having someone to pay your bills and boost your ego and make you feel important. But you never loved me. If you had, you wouldn't have been able to talk about me the way you did. That's not true." "It is true," I said. "And do you know how I know? Because this is what love actually looks like." I gestured between Richard and myself. "Respect, support, genuine affection. Someone who celebrates your successes instead of undermining them. Someone who builds you up instead of tearing you down. Someone who wants to be with you, not just use you." Richard squeezed my hand, and I could see the understanding in his eyes. He was beginning to piece together the full story. "Sarah," Marcus tried one more time, "what we had was real. What we had was a transaction," I said. "I provided financial support and emotional labor. You provided the illusion of companionship. But it was always temporary, wasn't it? You were always planning to leave when something better came along." Marcus couldn't deny it. We all knew it was true. "Well," I said brightly, "I found something better first. Congratulations on your new apartment, by the way. It's lovely." And with that, I turned and walked back into my house, Richard beside me. Through the window, I watched Marcus and Ashley stand in the courtyard for several more minutes, talking in hushed, urgent tones. Finally, they disappeared back into their apartment. "I take it there's more to this story than you've told me," Richard said once we were inside. I looked at this man who had shown me what real partnership looked like, and I knew he deserved the truth. So I told him everything. The whole sordid tale of Marcus's deception, the systematic way he'd undermined my confidence, the casual cruelty with which he and Ashley had discussed my future. Richard listened without interruption, his expression growing darker as the story unfolded. "That bastard," he said when I finished. "I'm so sorry you went through that." "Don't be," I said. "If I hadn't, I never would have been available when I met you. Besides," I added with a smile, "I think I came out ahead in this situation." Richard laughed and pulled me into his arms. "I'd say we both did." Over the following weeks, I watched Marcus and Ashley's relationship disintegrate from the comfort of my window seat. The financial pressure of maintaining their lifestyle without my subsidies was clearly taking its toll. They fought constantly, their voices carrying across the courtyard. Ashley started spending less time at the apartment, and Marcus began looking haggard and desperate. 3 months after our confrontation, Ashley moved out. I watched her load her belongings into a U-Haul while Marcus pleaded with her from the sidewalk. She drove away without looking back. A month after that, Marcus was evicted. I watched from my window as the sheriff's deputies posted notices on his door, as he tried unsuccessfully to negotiate with his landlord, as he finally packed his remaining possessions into his car and drove away. I never saw him again. Richard and I were married the following spring, just as I'd told Marcus we would be. The ceremony was small and elegant, held in the garden of our beautiful Victorian house. My family was there, along with Richard's and all the friends I'd made in my new life. Jennifer was my maid of honor, and David Peterson walked me down the aisle since my father wasn't able to travel. As I stood at the altar, looking into Richard's eyes and promising to love him for the rest of my life, I thought about the woman I'd been just 2 years earlier. That insecure, desperate girl who had accepted crumbs and called it love seemed like a stranger now. Marcus had been wrong about everything, but especially about one thing. I wasn't going to die alone. I was going to live surrounded by people who truly loved me, in a house filled with laughter and warmth and genuine affection. After the ceremony, as Richard and I danced to our first song as husband and wife, I caught sight of the apartment complex across the street. New tenants had moved into Marcus's old unit, a young couple who looked happy and hopeful as they started their life together. I hoped they would treat each other better than Marcus had treated me. The revenge I'd planned and executed wasn't just about proving Marcus wrong, though that had been satisfying beyond words. It was about reclaiming myself, about remembering who I was underneath all his manipulation and lies. He'd tried to convince me I was worthless, unmarriageable, destined for loneliness. Instead, I'd discovered I was strong, capable, and deserving of real love. The woman who had cried herself to sleep in that dingy apartment, believing she would never find anyone better than Marcus, was gone forever. In her place was someone who knew her own worth, who demanded to be treated with respect, who would never again accept scraps and call them a feast. Sometimes late at night, I wondered what had become of Marcus. Had he learned anything from our experience? Had he ever acknowledged, even to himself, how badly he'd misjudged me? But those thoughts never lasted long. I had more important things to focus on: my thriving career, my loving marriage, the beautiful life I'd built from the ashes of his betrayal. A year after our wedding, Richard and I welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Hope. As I held her in the nursery of our Victorian house, looking out at the street where Marcus had once lived, I made her a promise. I promised she would never doubt her own worth the way I had. She would never accept less than she deserved from anyone. She would know from the very beginning that she was valuable and lovable and worthy of respect. And if anyone ever tried to convince her otherwise, they would discover just how wrong they could be. Because sometimes, the people who underestimate us give us the greatest gift of all, the motivation to prove them spectacularly wrong. Marcus thought I would die alone. Instead, I learned to truly live. And that, I realized as I rocked my daughter to sleep in our beautiful home, was the sweetest revenge of all.